Hi, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Hope you all had a good week. Got a bunch of questions today, and I'm always looking for questions from you guys too. I've been asked, but not asked yet. Where's the C5 hipster gone? That's a good question. I don't know, early 1990s, I started making twinsers. I actually worked with royalty and stuff for twins. I was pretty blown away at how good they worked. Because I thought a twin fin would ride like a twin fin, and a tri-fin would ride like a tri-fin. But I tried putting those little canards up front, and the first few I tried, by myself, and they felt good, but they didn't feel right, and so I got a hold of so we worked together, and as soon as he showed me where the fins really needed to be, and the importance of the little channels out the back, the boards came to life. So we did those for a few years, and there was a kind of a surf fest thing with surfing magazine. Nick Carroll called me up. He said, "Hey, just make me any board you want. This is how much I weigh, and make me any size, any board you want." And so I made him like a 6'1" or something, but it was a swallowtail with a couple wings, and it had the twinser set up, and but I put a little trailer fin in it too, and called it the C5, and I put 4 channels in it and double wings. It kind of had the whole kitchen thrown in, and he after he wrote a few times, he emailed me back, and we talked, and he goes, I actually really like that board. You're just saying that, Nick. And he goes, no, there's something to it. And so I built a few for some of the team guys to try, and then I decided to have the C5 Challenge. And PT was the marketing director at the time, and the brand was rocking, and so we got a permit for trestles, and we actually had the C5 Challenge there. And not really many people really embraced the C5 challenge, the C5 concept. They did all kinds of weird combinations of 5 fins, but I was actually encouraging creativity. But it went off, and so we built, we had a model in our line called the C5, and it was popular for a while. And I think with a lot of designs, they kind of come and go, and but we still build them. Actually, the next year we had anything but 3 contests at Blacks, and a lot of top pros came to that too. And new models come and they kind of go, except for the exceptional ones like the Piranha and the Dwart, and Smoothie, and Slayer 2, and the Blackbird, Moby Fish. But the basic answer to your question is the C5. We still build them occasionally. Stu Henson, who used to work for me back in the 90s, shape for me, and before that at Canyon he sanded. But Stu makes quite a few C5s, and he's a big advocate of that design. And so, yeah, sorry for the long answer, but that's what happened to the C5. We still make them. All you need to do is, specify. And, there's some of the older models I really don't, the hand shapes I really don't have files for, but I can replicate, basically get close to what they are too. Okay, another leader question. How many additional liters should I add to my grovel board over my usual shortboard dims, if any? In a grovel board, you're going to be riding it usually in junk surf, smaller surf, weaker surf, and I'd advocate 2, 3, 4 liters extra. Maybe 2 or 3 liters. If your current literage is, say, 26 liters or 27 liters, I'd go up to 28 or 29. But you do want a little bit extra volume for a grovel board, amongst other design features. Flatter rocker, a little bit fuller outline. But yeah, I think 2 or 3 liters max. If you start getting about 4 or 5 liters on it off, if you're riding it, 510 or 6.0 or 6.2, you might start to. It might start to feel like a bit too much to you, but then again, we've had the Moby fish in the line for quite some time, and as the years have gone by, guys ordered them shorter and shorter and shorter, and I built some 6.4s, 6.2s. I call them the not so Moby fish, and they're arguably a groveler. They're a good all-around board, but they're they work exceptionally well in the small medium-sized days. What is a good East Coast step-up board for hurricane or winter swells? Good step-up board. The Slayer isn't necessarily a step-up board. It's a step-down board, and it's designed for actually slabby waves, where you have kind of a tight takeoff spot, and you just want to pull in and grin. The Slayer 2 is an excellent step-up board. All I did in the Slayer 2 is, people really like the Slayer, but they mentioned that it's kind of hard to change your line. It's harder than like a typical shortboard. Because I've pulled the wide point up a bit, I've made the nose a bit wider, and the outline is a little straighter behind center, and the rocker's set up to just drive. So the Slayer 2, I pretty much centered the wide point, pulled the nose in about 3/4 of an inch, and gave it a little bit more curve in the back half and a little bit more rocker, and it's got more of a triple concave. So I'd say the Slayer 2 is a great step up, and then the Blackbird, of course, which is very, very popular. It was meant to be a step up / semi-gun, and but it's become very popular, and that is a little bit narrower nose and tail than the Slayer 2, a little bit more rocker, and again, it has a triple concave.
And the Slayer 2 is supposed to be write it smaller? Remember?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, the Slayer one meant to be written 2 or 3 inches shorter, and
Sure.
and it's designed to fit in the pocket to handle late takeoffs. Slayer 2 is a true step up, where uh, you probably want to get it maybe 2 or 3 inches longer, than maybe an inch longer than your shortboard. But it is a true step up. The Blackbird is kind of meant to be ridden 3, 4, 5, 6 inches longer. But I've made 9-foot Blackbirds, and it's kind of Blackbird's kind of become a very loose term for gunnier boards. It's like step up semi guns and even guns. Um, you scroll up. A good shape for someone to cut off a wave storm. Basically anything. Now, the foam boards that you get at Costco and sporting goods stores, like the Wave Storm, they're I hate to admit it, but they're a decent board for beginners, simply because they have lots of width, nose, tail, center, big chunky rails, flatter rocker, and that's what you need when you're beginning. You need stability, and you need the ability to catch waves easy, and you need stability. And I hate to say it, but the molded boards kind of provide that, and they're safer. But the next board, after you come off of a wave storm, well, there's a couple thoughts to that. I would not take too big of a jump, like you've been riding, 8-foot wave storm or something, and then you say, okay, I'm ready for a shortboard, and that's a big mistake. Your second board should probably be maybe 6 inches shorter, 12 at the most, because surfing is, in my opinion, one of the hardest sports to learn. I've had a lot of professional athletes over the years that have come to me, and I've taken them surfing, and some of them it's their first time, and others, they've been surfing for a little while and they think they're pretty good, and but they're not, because surfing it's hard. You got to wait for a decent wave. You got to compete for that wave with the rest of the crowd. And you got to stand up, and you got to learn how to handle the board. And if you really want to progress, I think I've always said it takes, if you're going to take up a sport or an art like that, performance art, I always felt like it takes at least 3 days a week to improve. And if you can, 3 days, 3 sessions, if you can get in 4, 5, 6 sessions a week, you'll improve. But back to my original point is, if you take too big of a jump, you're going to be, you're not going to be, you're not going to be able to catch waves as easily. And that's what surfing is all about, is catching waves and having fun. Some people take it very seriously, but I think for the most part, people take, I think they're out for a good time. So you got to catch waves, and you got to be able to, handle the board. If you go down too much in length, like from an 8-foot board, and I've had people who go, well, I want to get my first shortboard, and I go, what size board have you been riding? And they go, 9-foot wave storm or 8.6 wave storm, but I'm ready for a 6.2, and I go, no, you're not. You might be ready for, like I said, at the most 12 inches shorter, for the reasons I just gave. So, I have a profile on my custom page. If you're ordering a board, it's very, very important that you fill out some of your personal information, like how old you are, how tall you are, especially how much you weigh, and then your surfing experience, like how long you've been surfing, how often do you get to surf, and what size board you're looking to replace. And it's not very many questions. It's not very many questions, but it's very helpful to me to design you the best board. So I can't really answer you. I can give you a couple ideas for the designs, but I can't really give you the length unless I know what length board you're coming off of. The Moby Fish is a great all-around board. It's a great beginner board. We're offering re-offering the egg shape again. It's been modernized a little bit. I haven't really promoted it yet. I've built some for a few shops. The Yeti, I've got I've got the Big Cat, which is kind of, I can build it 23 inches wide and 4 inches thick, but it's kind of, Big Cat's kind of more of a big guy performance board, and the Yeti's kind of a big guy step-up board. The Zeppelin is a fuller outline and a lower rocker, which Zeppelin would be a good alternative to the Moby Fish. But you're coming off a Wave Storm, which I assume has a very full outline, and you need to kind of, your next step down, you need to kind of avoid going to a narrow nose, highly rockered board. You need to stick with something that's got a fuller outline. And still a bit of length and a bit of volume. How much does the average shortboard cost? That is a good question. I might ramble on about this one too. I've told this little story a couple times, I think. But when I first started surfing, a 9.6 longboard, fully glossed, maybe a little bit of color, was in the stores, retail, $200. At that time, gas was 20, maybe 25 cents a gallon. How much is gas now? It's gone up by a factor of 20. Surfboards, if you're getting decent money for your craft, should easily be $1,000. And but there's a problem with there's a lot of guys, just like I did 50 years ago. I wanted a shape. I basically gave away my shapes the first year or two. I'd only charge people $20 or $30, and then the rest was the blank, which is 20 or 25, and the glassing that was maybe 150 back then. So, I was just as guilty of short selling myself. But then again, I wasn't that. I didn't have that much experience under my belt, and that problem still exists today. That a lot of people think shaping is cool. It is very cool. It's very, even if you're only shaping your own boards, it's very relaxing. It's meditative. The length of time it takes to shape a surfboard, once you kind of get it down a little bit, it's a perfect period of time, length of time. An hour if you're moving really fast, hour and a half on average, maybe a couple hours, 3 hours if you're still kind of feeling your way through it. But there's so many new shapers coming along every day, and there's kind of a big push for hand shapes, but the machines are available. You don't have to own a machine. You can go to a cutting service, and if you don't have a program, they'll provide you with a program for the board that you're going to quote unquote shape. And and the magazines are all behind do-it-yourself stuff, and magazines and the websites are just as guilty. There are a lot of great shapers that have put their long lives into building quality surfboards. And, I feel, $2,000 a board for, if you got 10,000 boards on your belt and you're good, you have quality glassing, shoot, I think they should cost $2,000. But unfortunately, what's the average surfboard cost, Pedro? Guy's got semi-experience, $700 maybe.
What do you mean by cost? Like cost? Beer cost?
No, not the cost. Cost to the customer. What do you think? 600?
Or 650?
650?
Yeah.
There's guys that are, pretty good shapers that are charging 650. So they're they're sort of holding the market back. My boards, Channel Islands, Firewires, I don't know why they get the money they get for those things. They're built overseas and, they work pretty good for a while and then they break. But Lost surfboards, I've known Matt for years and years, and I should say this, but we were at a trade show once. There was a big meeting about surfboards and blah blah blah, and I asked Matt afterwards. I go, Matt, why don't you raise your prices? You're a good shaper. You're one of the most popular shapers in the world. And he goes, my margins are good enough. It's okay, Matt. At the time his boards were, I don't know, $20 or $30 less than mine. But Matt, Matt, I'm not calling you out. I'm not. I like your program. I'm not calling you out. I'm just saying that, you know what? If you raise your prices $20 or $30, I don't think people would bat an eyelash. But, Matt, I love you, brother. I'm not calling you out. I'm just saying that's the overall problem of the industry is, people don't charge enough. And believe it or not, our margins from what you guys pay for a board and what they cost me to make are very slim.
Let's change subject here. I've got a good one here. What are your thoughts on sustainability for surfboard industry? Exactly.
Yeah. Well, we've made sustainability questions about sustainability.
Sustainability.
People didn't care for decades and decades and decades, and it's been in the last couple of decades, maybe the last decade, that people are becoming real concerned about pollution and how much trash there is and stuff that won't recycle, and so there's been epoxies developed for surfboards. There's been polyurethane foam isn't that recyclable. EPS is somewhat recyclable. So we've made steps, but I don't know. I dream in the future where maybe a surfboard is made out of materials that are totally recyclable. Not just the foam, but the fiberglass part. Maybe a broken surfboard gets ground up and gets made into something else functional.
Futures or FCS?
I can't answer that question. Peter's going, what about futures or FCS? They're both good. There's been so much effort put into improving. I think the fin designs really haven't. If you took a fin from 20 years ago, good tempo, a good performance glass on fin, fiberglass fin. I don't think I don't think the designs themselves have changed much. You know, in terms of the base, the height, the rake, the overall area. But what has improved over the years is the materials that they're built out of. I think wood fins are kind of cool, but in order to get fins are basically a quarter, 5/16 of an inch thick, and the problem with the original box fins is they were made out of plastic, and they didn't have a very good rebound rate or spring back. They just kind of would bend and they'd come back kind of slowly, and so a lot of the pros just refused to ride them, and they kind of extended the life of the glass on for a little while, because especially one company was litigious, and if you handmade a fiberglass fin for their box, they'd threaten to sue you. I don't think they ever actually sued anybody, but they went around thumping their chest. So the materials involved. I've always loved 4-ounce fins. With typical fin layup is 6 or 8 layers, and the heavier the cloth, referring to like the 6-ounce cloth, I don't know, 18, 20 layers maybe. Pedro, maybe not even that much. And the 8-ounce, and the 8-ounce fins, I don't know, they're I'm just guessing. I'm guessing here. I haven't really laid out fins, but 8-ounce fins, you might have like say 10 layers, and so you get a more rigid, you get a more stiff flex. I think with a 4-ounce, you get a much better control of the flex. And there's what is it called? The C10, G10 material, which is epoxy layup with very fine cloth, 40 or 50 layers, and those things are insane. I still have some friends riding G10 fins, and they've had them for 20 years, so they're very strong and they have very good flex. But they're a little heavier than the new composite fins that have come around in the last 10, 15 years. And with the composite fins, you can get a very light fin set with great foils and great flex characteristics. And through the composites, the fin makers have learned how to build different types of flex into fins: soft flex, medium flex, stiff flex, tip flex, flex that goes farther down the base, and both companies are doing it. And it's
yeah.
Pedro has just shown. No.
Yeah.
It's not. We're not going to advertise for him.
This guy's asking you, Professor, what are your thoughts on performance of single fin guns and semi guns? Wow.
What is important is the performance of a single fin gun or a semi gun. Look, once again, surfing for most people is fun. A lot of people, it's trying to push their performance as far as possible, and there's a reason why every year there's more and more 4-fin semi-guns and guns. I mean, a lot of the big guns these days that are ridden by most of the top surfers are 4-fins. And I'll try and relate this back to a single fin. A single fin and a tri-fin are similar in that their natural path is perpendicular to the wave energy. You take off on a tri-fin, and it wants to naturally go away from the energy. A board that's got twin fins or 4 fins that has fins on the rails doesn't have that center fin trying to drive you, straight into the beach or perpendicular to the wave energy. It wants to hug the wave. It wants to go with the flow. And So the single fin kind of has the same issue as the tri-fin. The tri-fin is a more advanced, I believe, design. It's been incredibly popular for 40 years now. But a single fin gun, if that's the vibe you're into, that's the vibe you're into. And it's, I don't know, I hate to call it performance level, but the performance level of a quad in bigger surf, for the most part, is amazing. The single fin, you don't generally see many. I'm saying generally, you don't see many great surfers riding single fins. But the thing about a great surfer is they can ride anything. But I think, if you're just out for fun, you're just out for a particular feel, heck, get a single fin. It's surfing's supposed to be fun. So you ride whatever rocks your world. Can you explain swing weight? That's a good one. I imagine it's got to do with pointy versus snub noses. Swing weight, I haven't really talked much about. It has a lot to do with the balance of the surfboard, like the balance, the template, the proportions, as you pointed out, the difference between a wide nose and a narrow nose. But you can have a wide nose board, but you can have a even wider tail, so that pulls the balance, the balance back. The swing weight moves back, so it has to do with the proportions. If the nose is a lot wider than the tail, that kind of pulls the wide point up. It kind of has more carry than a board that's got a very wide tail and a very narrow nose, like Shane Horan rode for years, and he probably would have won 3 world championships if he'd ridden the tri-fin. But he came second, I think, 3 times. Because he was riding a board with a tail, 3.5, 4 inches wider than the nose. He surfed brilliantly on the board, but he missed out on 3 world titles. And the boards with the wide points, so Shane's board, it was a pocket board. His turns were very tight in the pocket, and whereas a board with a wider nose than the tail, the wider the nose, the greater the proportional difference. 1 inch. I remember a board I meant to get it from Brewer, but he found out I was a shaper, so he had Sam Hawk shape it. It was actually a great board, but it was a diamond tail, and most of the boards the noses were still as wide or wider than the tails, but this had a nose that was like 13 and a half, it was 20 and a half, and 14 and a half tail. And I was tripping on it at first, but after I got used to it, I was kind of blown away at how loose the board was and how well it rode. Another interesting story relating to swing weight. Mike Henson of Endless Summer and GNS fame and the Red Fin era, he lived in La Jolla for, in the early 70s, and pretty much everybody was riding single fins then. But he was a big believer in of the balance point of the board, and he actually a good friend of mine, Xavier, who was just kind of a beginning shaper too. Mike Henson lived on High Street. Appropriately, and he had his shaping room back there. But we used to, Xavier and I used to put in these custom, it's hard to call them boxes because they were kind of oval shaped, so that they would take fishing weights in the nose. They're 3, 4 inches back from the tip, 5 inches back from the tip, and we had a plastic mail piece that we would route the hole, and then we'd wet out some cloth, stuff it in there, and then put the male piece in, so it press it against the walls of the board, the foam. And we made those for Mike. We made quite a few, and Mike was still surfing pretty brilliantly at the time. And there's other shapers that have done nose weights. So the thinking is as the surf gets bigger, you kind of want your weight or your swing weight forward, and that's the reason guns. I mean, some guns, they have noses narrower than tails, but most guns are a little bit wider in the nose than the tail. And guys I build plenty of tow boards with weights. The things they used to use for the foot straps, the inserts, and they would use those for weights if they wanted centered or slightly above center, or 8 to 12 inches above center, and those were very popular for a while. Swing weight, it's about the proportions of the board. It's whether if the foil is, that's another thing, foil. You could have a thicker nose and a thinner tail. It's the proportions of the board, the foil, the outline of the template, and those are the things that contribute to the swing weight. What else we got? Any more questions? Should I get to my board? Swing, good shape or something. You got any other questions?
This guy is asking, what's the best traditional way to make a board?
The best.
As a beginner shaper. Okay.
Well, another beginner shaper is asking a question.
What's the best traditional way?
What's the best? Well, traditional, you're kind of limiting yourself. I consider polyurethane and polyester as a traditional build. And that's probably arguably the easiest. Polyurethane foam is the easiest. EPS is a little tricky at first, but you have to alter the tools that you use. I mean, even the fact that I have a planer with a grinder barrel. I have a skill planer. I have a planer with blades, and then I have a planer with a grinder barrel on it. And it was specific. That's specifically designed for EPS, although it works pretty good on polyurethane too. But the EPS tends to tear a little bit, and so you've got to use different. You're better off if you're using a different, like a roller blade. Roller blade. If you use the roller barrel kind of cutting on your planer, and then sanding blocks are different, sanding grits are a little bit different. So I would say the EPS is a little bit more difficult to shape. And then as far as glassing goes, you have polyester, you have epoxy. And polyester is, if you're starting fresh, I think if you had two guys starting fresh, one guy on polyester and one guy on epoxy, and there's their first boards, if they were coached on the right amount of catalyst to the resin, I would bet that maybe not the first board, but over a short period of time, I would bet that the epoxy laminator would evolve or advance quicker than the polyester. Polyester, the catalyst is a big part of it, but polyester has in order for it to work properly, it has to have a pretty quick kick time. So you only have a limited time before it kicks and it starts to go off and get harder. And laminators tend to use, for the most part, laminators tend to use more polyester resin when they're glassing a board because they got to get it on and then they got to squeeze it out. They got to thin it out without drying it out and get the laps flipped and everything. But they have to do it, within a certain time period. The epoxy's got a much longer working period, and so it gives you time to, beginner, fumble around with it, and time to, maybe take a little bit extra off. Once again, not enough to dry it out, but to not see have excess resin. So, with that being said, maybe a lot of people might not agree with me, but I think if you're just starting out, I would. It's not traditional. Well, it's been around for a while, but it hasn't. It's been around almost as long as polyester. I think in the late 50s, 60s, early 60s, I heard of a few crew making styrofoam epoxy surfboards, but they were too light. And then there's the extruded styrofoam, which is a little bit tougher to shape than the EPS and the polyester. So, if you're asking the best traditional materials for a shaper starting out, I would say an E-poly combo where you use polyurethane core and you learn to use epoxy right out of the gate. And, that's my vote. And it's a little bit more eco-friendly. It's greener, eco-friendly. But
so I'm asking you, do you believe light surfboards are better than heavier boards for chunky and holloways? Lighter boards.
Someone's asking the question: do you believe that? Hi, Hank. You are always a great-looking guy. I know I've fallen apart over the years. Lighter in junkier, hollower ways.
Heavier,
Once again, if you have a design question, just take it to an extreme, because shaping is really all about balance, and if you want to be completely balanced or you want to take it one way or the other. Imagine a very, very light surfboard in junky, hollow waves. You wouldn't be able to control it. It would be bouncing all over the place. You'd have a hard time holding your line. A very heavy board, you'd probably hardly feel the bump, and it would have a lot more momentum, and you'd probably have you'd have a lot better luck in little junkier, hollower, maybe bigger surf. So yeah, just if you have a question, stop and think. What if I take it to an extreme? And you can kind of work out a lot of the answers yourself.
Can you compare the blade?
Hank, how's that? No, I think it's my camera. It's Hank Bizak, he commented. Yeah, Hank's a great shaper. In the late 70s, I used to still do a lot of freelance shaping before I actually settled in at Canyon. And Hank was gracious enough to give me some work. He's up in North County, San Diego. He still shapes a great board. Tip of my hat to you, Hank.
So the guy wants to compare the blade to the sheave.
The blade
to the sheave.
Compare the blade to the shiv. Well, they're both very similar in that they have flat decks. The blade is not a completely flat deck like the hatchet or the shiv. And the 419 is a almost flat deck, as is the blade. The shiv is a retake of the SD model, which I made for a stab Surf in the Dark a few years ago, and Dane wrote it. And the SD has become one of our most popular high-performance shortboards. And so we got kind of on this flat deck roll last year, and I said, well, shoot, why don't I make a flat deck SD? And it's got the same outline and the same bottom configuration. It's just almost a 1/4-inch center with a flat deck and the typical. I think you need them, angular rails with a lower apex, and it works great. It's got the fairly heavy concave of the SD. The blade is and the SD has a little bit more rocker than the blade. Not much, but a little bit. And the blade the shiv has got a completely flat deck. Maybe a light break in the tail area, but the blade is it has a light crown to it. It's got a pretty boxy rail, and it's got a triple concave bottom. The concave, its deepest point is probably a little less than 0.2, whereas the shiv is like 2.7, closing in on 0.3, which is, I consider anything approaching 3 inches is pretty, 3/10 of an inch is pretty deep concave. But the blade's been popular. We've had the blade around for 2 or 3 years now, and the shiv we kind of introduced last year. But they're both great. They're both great performance boards. What else we got?
What's the story behind the 1984 board?
Okay. The 1984 board. Maybe this is the first time you're tuning in, but I've talked about it several times before in the past. It's, when the tri-fins first came out, I remember walking. I just finished a surf at Black. It was like January '81. I think, January. And Greg Mungle, who I knew, was walking on the beach with Simon Anderson, and I hadn't met Simon before, but I knew he was a big guy like me. Not as big as me, but he's close. I kind of quizzed him on the board, and he was kind of low key, but I think he had signed a license agreement with Nectar Surfboards, and Nectar rocked it worldwide with 3 fins for the first few years. But I sat down and I wanted to watch Simon surf because he's a fantastic surfer. And Black's, when it's good, is the type of wave where I used to crack up because the Winnesty guys would come down and they thought they're all fucking badass, and they could rock Blacks, and they're so used to dropping straight down the face and then doing a kind of, not a square turn, but kind of stalling their turn a little bit, because Winnesty in all reality is kind of a big mush burger. But Blacks, when it's good, is a 200-yard long freight train, 100 yards, 200 on a very good day. But it's a very lined up, very fast, and when it's good, it's pretty hollow. And it was good that day. It was like solid 6 foot, and I watched Simon take off on his first wave, and he went straight down to the bottom like the Winnesty guys would do. And I thought he was just going to fucking get passed up. But he squared off, and he did the heaviest backside bottom turn I'd ever seen. Came straight up the face, did a huge gaff, and my jaw was already in his head. And he did about 8 more on one wave, and I just went, whoa, it's got to be Simon. Simon's that good. And I kind of wrote it off for a couple months, and Bolton Colburn, who a pretty good local surfer, rode for GNS, and he went to Australia in March, and he came back in April with a tri-fin. And I watched him surf on it, and I said, okay, there's something to this design. And so I started messing around with tri-fins and design, altering the shape of the design. And you have to understand that coming off of the single fins and even the twin fins to some degree, the last third of the board, the rails start to taper and they start to get bladed out. And with the tri-fins, you could carry a little bit more thickness in the rear portion of the board. And that coupled with, I had some pretty good team riders at the time. Richard Cram got a lot of boards. Wes Layton was a team rider. Greg Day, Mike Burness, probably all names you haven't heard of, but they were top world competitors back then. And they kept pushing me to make the boards thinner and thinner and thinner. And I was kind of freaking. I guess I kind of pushed back in my own way. I'd make them thinner, but I started making the decks flatter and flatter. And I started to get it down. I started to really develop my own style, like kind of against the grain. Pretty much the rest of the world was still doing kind of a crown deck tail and a pinchier rail. And my boards eventually evolved into a flattish deck with a flat tail section, and it was thinner than the convex decks. And but the rails became very vertical in the last, I want to say 12 inches, but they creep up sometime to 14, 16 inches. Very, very vertical square rails, but the distance between the top of the board and the bottom of the board was less. And in 83, I was still judging. I judged from 79 to 84. A lot of pro contests, Pipe Masters, and etc. But I was judging I think it was Body Glove had a series, 6 contests that kind of spring and summertime, and there was one at Ocean Beach, and a lot of the world's best surfers were in it because they're on the way to South Africa for the J-Bay event. And I was sitting on the judging tower and I saw this young guy, Aki. I'd kind of heard of him, but he was 16 years old, and he was red hot, but I could see his board was hanging him up. And so I thought, well, he's a good candidate for one of my square-railed, square-tail rail boards. So I made him one. I rushed one out, and I missed him. He went to South Africa, and I think he beat Sean Thompson. He's 16 years old. That was his turning point. He just rocked the world. And he came back, and I had the board for him at the OP contest, which I judged that one too. And he said, thanks. I really appreciate it. I'm going to ride the board I'm used to, but I'll ride it when I get home. I'll get back to you. And he got home, and the first thing he did is he won the Pepsi Pro Junior on the board, and he won a few other local contests. And then he took it to, and I think in the quarters he broke about 6 inches in the quarters, and he kept surfing in the semifinals, which I don't know, maybe there is something to square those boards. But at any rate, Bob Hurley called me because he's sponsored by Billabong, and Bob used to run Billabong USA. He called me and said, could you make Aki a few more boards? I'll happily pay for them. And I said, sure. And that was the beginning. I'd been making that type of board for several years, but 84 was kind of when Aki really blew up, 84, 85, and so that's where the name comes from. 84, and I didn't really have model names back then. I can't remember. I don't think, but yeah, I want a board like Aki's. 90% of my customers said, I want a board like Aki's because I want to surf like Aki. But over the years, it kind of faded. As I said before, models kind of come and go because everybody wants the latest and the greatest. And about eight years ago, my Australia people said, hey, we should do a limited series of the 84. And I said, sure. And so we agreed to do 100 and talked with Aki about it and gave him a royalty. And I think we sold 100 boards. I always want to say in a day, but I think it took 2 days. And half the people wrote them and half the people hung them on their walls. But the people that wrote them, they said, fuck, these things work really good. And so I kind of, for the next year, I made 100 boards and I cut it off. I'm sorry I don't make those anymore. It was a limited edition. But then a couple of years after that, I said, what the heck, let's reintroduce it. And there's a group of people that like the 84. The true 84 has a lower rocker. It has a little bit of V in the tail. It has a more even foil. It has a little bit thicker nose because back then we used to run beaks. The beaks were around until the 89, 90, I guess. Kelly Slater killed the beak. And they sold well, and so a couple of years ago we said, well, let's start making some other flat end. So the hatchet, which is kind of shaped, but a little bit fuller than a standard, fuller outline than a standard performance shortboard, and the shiv, which is flat deck, the blade with a slight, almost flat deck, and the 84 with a almost flat deck. And I've made some customs. If you click onto my customs page, I have a little blurb on the beginning of it, and I get people that email me and they don't give me any personal information, and they just say they want a length. They say, oh, I want a 6'6" dwart, and that's all the information earlier. It would really help me if you answered those questions: your height, your weight, your age, your ability, how often you get to surf, and what you're coming off of. But in the entry to the custom section, I'm going to have to sign off after this. I have a little blurb that says, by all means, I'm here. I'm your imagination. I'm your hands. And you can combine, if within reason, you can combine a few designs. And I combined, a guy wasn't sure if he wanted a Slayer 2 or a Slayer, so I met him halfway on the design, and he was kind of freaking. And I go, look, I designed all these boards, but I got to go, and y'all have a good week, and stay healthy.